It was the wild, wild west of the World Wide Web. In the late 90s and early 2000s, the internet was very new. Instead of DMs and social media, we had chat rooms and private messages with strangers. There were no photos, videos, TikToks. We were all just anonymous, offering mostly inaccurate descriptions of ourselves to try to make a connection with someone else who was also hiding behind a computer screen. We wanted to find like minded people to discuss ourselves, our lives, or maybe our deep, dark secrets and desires. The anonymity made it feel safe. But what if instead of exploring those secrets and desires just online, it led to real life cannibalism and murder? Today, we explore what happens when an online forum leads to real life disaster. It's time to get off that computer and let the fresh air in. Hello, everyone, and welcome back, or welcome if you're new. My name is Erin, and I am fascinated by all things cults, true crime, and unique spiritual practices. If you like true crime cases and taking down cults, well, this is the place for you. I drop a true crime video every Tuesday, and then some type of cult or deep dive video on Thursdays and Saturdays. So if you like this kind of stuff, please consider subscribing. I would absolutely love to have you here. Also, I am looking for single parents to sponsor this holiday season. So if you are one or would like to nominate one, please email me yours or their Amazon wish list and a little bit about yourself, and I'll feature it in a video next month. And hopefully, myself and these wonderful viewers can help you make the holidays special for your kiddos. So, today's video is quite disturbing. I literally had no idea cannibalism was so common that it would require an online forum for people to discuss their desires to eat human flesh. But in the early 2000s, such a forum existed, and it led to voluntary murder and cannibalism. This is a crazy story, but viewer discretion is advised. If this topic makes you feel uneasy, then please by all means skip this video because the details are nothing short of disturbing. I've been covering a lot of online brainwashing, cults, and scams lately, so this is a hard left turn. And if you found me because you were following Twin Flames, Universe, or other cult topics, totally okay if you want to skip this video. I just wanted to make that disclaimer clear for you, especially because I've gotten some new subscribers and I don't want you to be totally scared away from my channel. Today's story is centered around Armin Meiwes. Armin was born almost exactly 62 years ago on December 1st, 1961, in Germany. He was born an only child. However, he did have two older half brothers on his father's side. But when he was 8, his father left the home and Armin was raised by his single mother. He felt lonely growing up. He had no close siblings and no father figure to show him the ropes or support him or comfort him. So he found comfort in stories and fairy tales. He noted that Hansel and Gretel was a story that always resonated with him, but not the way it resonated with most children who love the idea of thwarting an evil old lady by escaping her grasp and eating her house. Instead, Armin sympathized with the old lady, and thus his curiosity about the taste of human flesh was born. If you don't know what Hansel and Gretel is, it's a story about a woman who builds a candy house to lure children to it. She traps them, lets them eat the house to fatten them up before she eats them. Yeah, not exactly a fairy tale, I guess. Armin somehow, at such a young age, recognized that this desire was likely problematic. He didn't share this information with anyone, but to cope with these desires, he created an imaginary brother he named Frank, who he would talk to about his cannibalistic fantasies, even at such a young age. He was a child. And I'm not a psychiatrist, but after hearing why he became fascinated with cannibalism, I can only speculate it's because of the abandonment he felt he experienced when his father left the family. And we're going to dive into that and some studies that might prove that a little bit later. You see, sources said that when he became fascinated with cannibalism, he fantasized about eating his friends so that they, quote, would always be part of him, unquote. It's like he didn't want his friends to ever leave him or abandon him, much like his father did. He felt such an intense need to have and feel a deep connection with people, and the way he believed he could achieve that was by eating those people, because that way they would literally always be a part of him. And we've seen this with other cannibals like Jeffrey Dahmer, who came from a broken home and has been reported as saying something similar about his victims, that he just didn't want them to ever leave him. God, imagine feeling so alone that you believe the only way to keep people near you is by killing and eating them. It's so disturbing to think that people can actually adopt that way of thinking. And it's odd too because it's like both Dahmer and Armin recognized that this is not a normal thing to think about or believe, but they don't seek out help for these thoughts or behaviors. I think now we might call these things intrusive thoughts. Instead, these people secretly act out on them, and it's really upsetting to consider that people are actually capable of killing and eating each other, especially in today's modern world. Armin's mother has been described as tyrannical, leaving him always feeling isolated. He didn't seem to be able to make friends very easily, and this was a point of contention for him. She was also deeply controlling. It was reported that once when he was young, he showed up to a kid's party fully dressed as a woman, in a dress with makeup, and he looked so much like a woman that he was unrecognizable according to people who were at the party. It was like his mother played dress up with him. And she also bossed him around. He was constantly carrying her bags and was always given directives on how to serve her. He lived with his mother for a long time, throughout his adolescence and young adulthood, until he would end up working for the army. I believe when he left the army, he also went back to live with his mother. And soon later, he would become a computer technician, and his eyes would be opened to the World Wide Web. Being an introvert, Armin found connection on the internet, whether it was in chat rooms that he was searching for and frequenting or exploring sexual videos. He began to find a community on the internet, people who were more like minded. He discovered that he was bisexual, and of course, since it was the 90s and homosexuality was by no means accepted by society, he explored many of his sexual fantasies online, but is said to have also had some in person, real life relationships with some male colleagues. He also visited some, for lack of a better term, and to adhere to YouTube's policies, men of the night as a way to explore his sexual desires. In 1998, Armin's mother sadly passed away. And this was when his most true and most disturbing desires would really begin to take shape. When he wasn't under his mother's watchful eye, he allowed his curiosity about cannibalism to grow and form into a true fetish. The man who was known by the community around him as helpful and charitable, who hosted dinner parties and mowed his neighbor's lawn, had a deep, dark secret. He had a cannibal fetish, and this fetish was beginning to take over thanks to him discovering that he wasn't actually alone in this fetish. Oh no, there were plenty of anonymous people all over the internet wanting to eat human flesh, or perhaps even more disturbingly, who wanted to volunteer themselves to be eaten. In 1999, Armin came across the online forum, The Cannibal Cafe. This was an online chat room where random anonymous people would talk to each other. Think of the Zoom chat feature where everyone has access to it, except no one has a picture up, no one is using their real name. You can't see who this person is. You have no idea who you're talking to. Armin himself used a name similar to the one he had given his childhood imaginary friend. Online, Armin went by Frankie. In this chat room, you could make little advertisements for what you were seeking. So, like, I think it's the equivalent of like Craigslist romantic ads, like MFW, men searching for woman, and then it like shares the type of person you're seeking. Or do you guys remember Missed Arrange? Was it Missed Arrangements? Missed Connections, where if you were like in public and you saw someone or had like an interaction with someone briefly and thought maybe it could go somewhere romantically, you would post on Craigslist like, "Hey, I saw you. You were wearing this. You were at this cross streets. I was the guy that picked up your purse for you and returned it. You're beautiful. I'd love to connect." And people would like find love connections on missed connections. So I think it was similar to that. And you could say you're looking for a relationship and share the type of person you wanted to have a relationship with, and share your sexual orientation and share what type of sexual fantasies you had. And whoever was interested in that lifestyle and fit the description would respond. And Frankie posted that he was looking for a young, fit man to volunteer to carry out this cannibal fantasy he had. He said he wanted a well built man willing to be slaughtered and consumed. I mean, I guess you have to give him a little credit. He is asking for volunteers. He's not just going to murder some unwilling victim, I guess. And if you can believe it, a whopping 200 people responded to the post, but nearly all of them would end up having cold feet later. Until a 43-year-old man named Bernard Bergen Armando Brandes responded to the post. Bernard seemed to be happy and successful. He had even recently had a live in girlfriend before admitting to her that he was curious about men, and that eventually led to their breakup. It also became known during the trial that Bernard had a near obsession with self mutilation. A boyfriend of 3 years testified that Bernard was so excited at the idea of getting his genitalia bitten off that he offered to pay his now ex boyfriend to do it. The ex boyfriend testified that they had had a very healthy sex life, but Bernard was always asking to be bitten everywhere, and it kind of made him uncomfortable. But he especially wanted to be bitten on his manhood. His ex girlfriend, however, testified differently, saying that he was the nicest man she'd ever met. And that's a quote. And she said she could never imagine him being violent or wanting to engage in such violent activity. So it seemed that Bernard had been leading a double life, and unfortunately in the 90s, that wasn't uncommon for homosexual men to do. There was so much societal judgment surrounding homosexuality around the world, let alone in Germany, where just a few decades prior, people were being targeted for their sexuality. So it's really no surprise that once the internet came to be, there would be a certain level and support to be found online. People exploring their sexuality and maybe living double lives. People were exploring their sexuality in what felt like at the time a safe space because there were other people doing the same, and they were all living seemingly double lives, one in the real world and one online. Bernard seemed pretty enthusiastic about Armin's post. He had always had this fantasy of having his genitalia either bitten or cut off and was curious about cannibalism himself. I mean, he was in the Cannibal Cafe. And Armen had finally found a volunteer who he could live this fantasy out with. So they connected and chatted back and forth for a while, and it was only a matter of time before they would meet up and do the deed. So the advertisement was posted in early March, and on March 9th, very quickly in 2001, Bernard would meet Armen at Armen's home. Since Armin would want to relive this fantasy for years to come, he had set up a video camera to record the act, as well as conveniently record Bernard consenting to the act itself. To prepare and to hopefully make it as pain free as possible, Bernard took 20 sleeping pills, drank a bottle of cough syrup, and according to some sources, washed all that down with half a bottle of schnapps. Now, folks, we are about to get into some of the more gruesome details of what happened next. So if you want to fast forward, please do so. I'll try to remember to leave timestamps down in the description below. Bernard had initially insisted that his member be bitten off, but that didn't work so well. So instead, Armin cut it off. Bernard then attempted to eat it, but due to the texture being, according to them, too chewy, he was unable to do so. So, to make the penis more appetizing, Armin decided to fry and season it with garlic, wine, and even some of Bernard's fat. Yeah, but I guess it was too burnt for either of them to eat. Neither of them could eat it, so Armin cut it into pieces and fed it to his dog. So obviously, Bernard was bleeding profusely and I'm sure in a lot of pain. To ease this pain, Armin ran Bernard a bath while he went and relaxed and read a Star Trek book. Bernard was drifting in and out of consciousness, so even though Armin was checking on him every 15 minutes or so, he knew he had to hatch some kind of plan. And honestly, I can't decide if I think this is even more cruel to do to Bernard. The man must be in extreme pain. You just dismembered part of him while he was still alive. And like, you know what you're here for. You know you're probably going to kill him. So why are you waiting? I really hope that Bernard was completely numb and unconscious throughout this ordeal because it sounds absolutely torturous. It sounds like actual torture. So after praying, Armin finally did the deed. He stabbed Bernard in the throat, killing him, and then he hung the body on a meat hook to bleed out. He literally prepared the body as if he had just had a deer hunt and was preparing the meat. He dismembered the body, separated all the meat, and froze it. All the body parts that weren't edible were buried in his garden, and he claimed that that's what Bernard wanted him to do. He literally stored this human meat in the fridge with things like frozen pizza, and he would eat it over the next 10 months. He said that every time he ate a piece of Bernard's body, he remembered fondly the night that they had spent together. And with what we know of his upbringing, I can only imagine that he felt some kind of strange friendship or bond with Bernard. He enjoyed this encounter with Bernard so much, actually, that he put up another advertisement in the Cannibal Cafe. In 2002, this post was exposed to authorities who were able to finally connect it to Armin himself. They showed up to his home and found a 4-hour videotape of the incident and several frozen body parts hidden in a false backing of a freezer. Luckily, Armin admitted guilt and confessed to this heinous act. So the only thing left to be proven was if this was actually a consented manslaughter. So we talk a lot about consent and informed consent on this channel, especially how it pertains to cults and manipulative people. This case is especially interesting to me because there was a consent on the victim's part. The devil's advocate in me wants to ask, if this is the way someone wants to go, is it really our place to say that it's not the right way to do it? See, I had an acquaintance recently decide to do a voluntary unaliving because he'd become so ill and his condition was only going to get worse with time. He was a comedian and he was completely immobile. He could barely talk and he just couldn't have the life experience he wanted to have anymore. So, while he could still communicate what he wanted, he communicated that he wanted to go through with an assisted unaliving. And I completely respect that choice because I feel like if I was in a similar position, I would want to do the same thing. I mean, it's probably something I'd at least consider doing. But this, a healthy, as far as we know, man volunteers to be killed and eaten as some kind of sexual fantasy. It just sounds way too far fetched to be real. And it really begs the question, was this really a desire of his, or was this a case of role play gone wrong? And is Armin being fully honest in his story? The video, which is not public, shows that Bernard did consent to the act. But the biggest question for me is if he was sitting there bleeding for an hour or so before he was killed and he was hopped up on sleeping pills, could he consent to the rest of the act being performed? Did he know and understand the full scope of what he was offering to do? Or maybe he thought, like, if I saw that post, I'd be like, there's no way this is real. But maybe it was. And furthermore, it brings Bernard's mental health into question. Is this a form of unaliving ideation that could have otherwise been treated if Bernard had communicated to a professional about these intrusive thoughts? And also, something I have to bring up is cannibalism itself isn't illegal in the United States. However, bodily harm is illegal, so you would have to commit an illegal act in order to consume the human flesh. But I can't help but wonder, especially as it pertains to this case, that if cannibalism was illegal, there might be less people trying to find like a loophole around the law. Like, yes, murdering someone is illegal, but they have consented to having a body part chopped off and eaten. Does that make it okay? There's just so much mental gymnastics involved in this case and a lot of questions that come up for me, which honestly is why I wanted to cover this case in the first place, because in my opinion, murder is murder. And cannibalism is disturbing and so, so, so concerning that I'm honestly shocked that it isn't illegal. And it seems to be a somewhat common compulsion the more I look at true crime, like specifically in criminals. It's not common amongst people. It's a very uncommon and rare thing, but when I look at how many cases I've covered where there is cannibalism involved, it's like, whoa, what? And honestly, I don't know how many more cannibals I can cover because to me, it's really one of the more upsetting kinds of cases. But I wanted to cover this case because of the psychology behind it, because from both sides, it's so fascinating to me. So if you're out there and you have any professional insight, I would be super curious to hear from you. And maybe we'll do a deep dive on cannibals themselves. So let me know if that's something you're interested in or curious about, or if you're like, please never talk about this ever again. I respect that wish. I did find a study that explored the differences in serial killers versus serial killers who are also cannibals, and it concluded that those who were cannibals seemed to have, and I quote, more brain abnormalities, lower economic status, and ding, 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 abandonment of a parental figure, unquote. And that's what we're seeing here with Armin. What's also interesting is that another study explored how, in certain tribes back in the day, cannibalism was a way to stay connected to a loved one who had passed on. Not that you would kill them, but if a loved one did pass away and you consumed their body, their spirit would fill your body. And it's interesting that Armin seemed to have made this same distinction for himself in a weird way, that if he consumed someone, they would never be able to leave him. They would always be a part of him, they would always be with him. Yet another study found that cannibal homicides are almost always sexually driven, which is just difficult for me to understand. I think many of you know at this point that this is a big reason why I started this channel was to try to understand the things that I don't understand. And when it comes to cannibalism, it's just one thing I just don't think I'll be able to fully wrap my head around. But being able to look at studies and see similarities between cannibals has helped. So I highly recommend if you're curious to just do a Google search. It's a weird thing to search, to be honest. I was typing in asking questions about cannibals and I was like, "Oh my god, what if my search history is like ever looked at by a law enforcement officer? They're going to think that I am literally crazy." Anyways, so so this case seemed to, at the time, perplex people just like it's perplexed me. But on January 30th of 2004, Armin was found guilty of manslaughter and he was sentenced to 8 years imprisonment. Yeah, just 8 years. But Armin expressed remorse for his actions. He said he even wanted to write a book to warn others about how to avoid similar behavior. But look, in my opinion, this guy knew what he wanted to do was wrong. He thought that getting consent from the victim recorded would save him from prosecution. So, rightly so, in 2005, a German court argued that he needed to be convicted of murder rather than manslaughter because he clearly had a motive, and that motive was for himself or sexual gratification. It was also just purely selfish, like, hey, I have a sexual fantasy, I'm looking for volunteers. Like, what happened if he didn't find a volunteer? Would he have just done it? Like, I feel like this is something that would not have been avoided either way if this was something he'd been thinking about since childhood. And luckily, in 2006, he was found guilty of murder and sentenced to life imprisonment. But apparently, he's allowed out of jail. Yeah, he's allowed to leave jail if he wears a disguise. Yeah, it seems kind of crazy to let a cannibal out of jail and be like, no, 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 he's fine out there. Just, if no one recognizes him, it'll be fine. Like, I don't think the problem is other people recognizing him. The problem is him eating other people. Like, is this real? This can't be real. So, like, if you're in Germany, look out for a dude in sunglasses and a hoodie because he might be Armin the cannibal. And also, resources said, I don't know why this was humorous to me, but now he claims to be a vegetarian. So, honestly, thank God for that. Well, that was a lot. I hope you're still watching, and if you are, I'd love to know what you think about this case, especially if you have any insight to compulsions like cannibalism. I found one resource that said a common theme in cannibalistic desires or behaviors is loneliness. This desire to have people with you always, and if they become a part of you, then they can never leave. And I'm really curious to hear what you think about this. And Like I like to do with most of my videos, if there is a key takeaway from this, I think it's to just be very wary of the people you meet online. Even if they seem to be upfront and honest about their intentions with you just never know until sometimes it's too late. We've been talking so much on this channel about consent, online groups, and forums, and how things can take disastrous shape, even if they seem like a harmless online group or an online friend. So just please use caution and discernment. Always ask questions and never meet anyone you've just met online alone. Always tell your loved ones where you're going and always meet in a public place. Maybe a few times before one of you goes to the other person's home. Well, I'm going to go ahead and get off my soapbox for now. I'm really excited to be bringing to you guys someone who has a master's in psychology. We're going to talk all about cult psychology, and I am interviewing her this afternoon. So please stay tuned for that. I really appreciate you watching. I appreciate all of your support, and I hope you have a great rest of your week. I will see you in the next video very soon. Thank you again. Be safe out there. Bye.